Hi, my name's Sean McLean, and welcome to my YouTube channel. If you haven't seen my first video, I retired a couple of years ago at age 54 and decided last year at age 55 to write my first novel. After about 9 months of drafting, revising, and editing, I completed a 95,000 word neo-noir thriller called The Devil in the Blue, which should be available in the next month or so. After a host of rejections from traditional publishing agents, I decided to do the self-publishing route. There's going to be a later video on that process, with who I'm working, the marketing process, the print project, the cover project. That process will be documented in a later video. So the subject of today's video is the hook, or the opening lines of a novel. I think there's a modern day obsession with the hook, with to grab the reader so that they won't stop reading. So, I don't disagree with that concept generally, but I think it's gone too far. It seems to be the only thing there is. I'm glad I didn't know about this idea of the hook until I was really just started drafting this novel. I think I might have missed many a great book if I had only read the first line and had to be mesmerized, or I would put the book down. I believe part of the problem is that the quality of the entire work is what drives the value of the opening. Of course, the hook or opening can entice, but if the rest of the book lacks merit, it's more of a bait and switch. And I think there's some phenomenon of that going on. Of course, there are likely hundreds of videos on this subject, but I've made a study of the idea as well and want to share those thoughts with you today. So this video is broken down into two parts. Part one is, part one's about the hook or the opening line of the novel with some examples. Part two is related to the hook, but it also has a tangent benefit to editing. It relates to the later chapters or scenes of a book. This is only the second video of this series, and I may be getting a little out of order with the series. So maybe in a way this channel is a bit postmodern. It's non-linear, but I'll try to keep it as linear as I can. And I think the best way to start with the novel is at the beginning, with the actual words in the first line. So I've selected 10 opening lines with 2 honorable mentions. They're not in any particular order, and there are no doubt hundreds of other opening lines. I'd love to hear more, so feel free to comment and in the comment section, and I'll read those. But I needed to select enough to get the idea across, but not have an hour-long video. So with that, let's get started. So number 1 is the Bible. In Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So is that a hook in the modern sense? Probably. If it's not, you really can't get any more than the beginning of the beginning, which is what that is. It's a classic. Number 2, more modern, is Jaws by Peter Benchley. The great fish moved silently through the water, propelled by short sweeps of its crescent tail. It doesn't really get much better than that. So, he never uses the word shark. You have an idea of a crescent tail. It's swimming in the water. It seems fast. He uses the word propel. It's actually genius, in my opinion. So is the rest of the book as good as the opening line? Probably not. And the first chapter is phenomenal. It's not it's not the best writing, but that opening line, the opening chapter, it's a fun read. And actually, I think it's probably better than 99% of the swill that's written today. So it's a great opening line. It's a great starter. Number 3, Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Call me Ishmael. Is that a great opening line? I don't think so. It's iconic and it's classic, but I think it's in hindsight. But there's nothing in the line itself except perhaps some mystery as to the character and the structure of the phrase. Is it his real name? Why does he matter? Those are important questions, clearly. It matters throughout the book. But is it a hook in the modern sense? I don't think it is. And I think Moby Dick and its opening line is probably the best example of why the hook can be defeating. To me, Moby Dick is arguably the greatest American novel. But I actually believe it could be one of the greatest novels ever written in any language. And I say that, I don't say that lightly. I think the test is whether a book can be improved. And I don't think it can. I don't think Moby Dick can be improved. I don't think even Herman Melville himself could have written that book again at a later time. I think it was a freak event in time and place. But I wouldn't even change the first line because the entire book is so perfect afterwards that it makes the first line perfect. Number 4, Don Quixote by Cervantes. And I'm using the Edith Grossman's translation. Somewhere in La Mancha, in a place whose name I do not remember, a gentleman lived not long ago, one of those who has a long lance and ancient shield on the shelf and keeps a skinny nag and a greyhound for racing. So this novel is considered is the progenitor of the modern novel. So I feel like I had to include it. But interestingly, considered it's 400 years old, that's a pretty good hook, I think. I mean, I don't think it's a modern hook because it's not really exciting or, it's not grabby, but actually it summarizes the book perfectly. And that's 400 years old. So if you're going to use a hook, it's pretty effective for a 400-year-old book that is about Don Quixote. Next, number 5 is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins. So this opening is the book. Of course, it's the title, but it's powerful because it conjures the narrator's tone and voice, even his obsession. And it's all wrapped up in one sentence. It's perfect. Number 6 is Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. Scarlett O'Hara was not beautiful, but men seldom realized it when caught by her charms, as the Tarleton twins were. Does this sentence really drive you to want to read this Pulitzer Prize megaseller? Maybe, but I think it's more of an accurate summary of the entire book. The story is about Scarlett and her charms, of course, but the book is Scarlett. So what's the best way to start it? Then with her name. Are there more exciting hooks? Probably, but again, the book is a masterpiece, so in hindsight, it's great. Number 7, Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. It was love at first sight. So I'm not in love with this novel as much as most readers are. It's funny and clever, I admit, but it repeats its jokes and gags, I think, repetitively. But the first line of a war novel that is romantic as well as a cliche is incredibly clever. It actually is. It's ironical because the book's not really about love at all. It's the opposite. It's about love, war, and death. So that one-liner is classic. Number 8, Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy O'Toole. A green hunting cap squeezed the top of the fleshy balloon of a head. So the picture drawn in the reader's mind is perfect. And that's all that's really needed because the book's about Ignatius and he's obese and he dresses like a slob and he wears that funny hat. But is it a modern hook? I don't think so. But again, it doesn't matter because the book is fantastic and funny, and that opening sentence perfectly encapsulates Ignatius. Number 9, Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. It was a pleasure to burn. Enough said. There's no improvement on that line. Number 10, Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. It was the worst of times. It was the best of times. Sorry, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. So not only is that structure beautiful with its opposition, but the reader will want to know why it was both. And the French Revolution, the period in which the book takes place, had both. It had hope for a better future, but it had a dark side with its brutal killings. And that phrase perfectly encapsulates the time in which that book was supposed to take place. And again, it's frankly beautiful. So honorable mentions. 1984 by George Orwell. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Now, there's nothing magical or fantastic about a bright, cold day in April. That's prosaic. But the clock striking 13, that is odd. And it makes you wonder, well, how can clocks strike 13? It makes you envision something. It's odd. It makes you think, oh, something must be different or changing. When does it take place? I think that certainly prompts the reader to continue. But again, the book is a masterpiece, and it matches the rest of the book because the book is so good, it puts the opening line in context. So the last is Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. All children, except one, grow up. Again, like the ones above it, you couldn't say it any better than that. There's no name, there's no reference, but that's the story. And it holds throughout the story. And as more beautiful as a story clues to the end, it actually is more beautiful. So now we're going to move into part 2 of this. And because of the modern obsession with the opening lines of the first page, writers can lose sight of the rest of the book. And I think there needs to be more attention paid to the opening lines of chapters 2 and 3 in particular, but also the rest of the chapters and scenes. The reader needs to be engaged in every chapter to prompt them to continue to read. It's not just one and done. I mean, I think that is common now. I think it's one and done. They write the first paragraph and the first sentence, and it's good to go. So I learned the value of creating engaging scenes from, his name is Patrick Walsh. He has a YouTube channel on editing and publishing. I'm going to put the link to this video that I watched of his in the description. So it was through his channel that I learned and used much of the drafting and editing techniques for my novel. And this one particular episode on fixing boring scenes was particularly valuable. The suggestions not only create more engagement to the reader, but it also ends up deleting a lot of unnecessary text. So like I said, I attached a link to the video in the description of this video. I recommend you watch it many times because it is so valuable and so constructive. It's just hard to believe it's just available and it's so perfect. So when writing my novel, not every scene lends itself to a clever or exciting opening phrase, since some scenes could be needed to progress the plot and to save time, describing time goes by. But for most scenes, the idea of writing a scene and moving the point of the scene to the opening is something you should think of when writing each scene. And in other words, what you are trying to accomplish with a scene, what emotion from the reader are you trying to evoke? So you write your chapter, and you have this idea of what it's about. Once you have that, you want the reader to be engaged with that intent and that emotion as soon as possible in the scene. So I'll let you watch Mr. Walsh's videos because I can't do a better job than that. But so my advice is it's important to have a hook, an engaging first sentence to engage the reader. But don't forget that the rest of the work needs to do the lifting. Every chapter or scene needs to be engaging and deserves its opening as well. So thank you for your time. If you found this video interesting, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And again, as I said earlier, if you have any suggestions on opening lines that you appreciate or that I might have missed, which I'm sure I've missed dozens or hundreds, please let me know in the comments. Thank you very much.